Hello and welcome to Saturday Night Stories Live. I know it's Thursday night, but this will be rebroadcast on Halloween. So hello and spooky times to you. I'm here at the new studios for the Acting Ensemble, who are assisting us with this program. And we're going to have a good time with this, and hopefully we'll all be scared. So with the first story is Judy Spiegel from the Acting Ensemble, and go.
The Pale Man by Julius Long. I have not yet met the man in number 212. I do not even know his name. He never patronizes the hotel restaurant, and he does not use the lobby. On 3 occasions, when we passed each other by, we did not speak, although we nodded in a semi-cordial, non-committal way. He checked in just after my arrival. I was walking down the stairs when I encountered him ascending with his bag. Oddly, our bellboy did not show him to his room. I should very much like to make his acquaintance. It is lonesome in this dreary place. With the exception of the aged lady down the corridor, the man in number 212 and I are the hotel's only guests. But this utter quiet is precisely what the doctor ordered. I wonder if the man in number 212 has come here for a rest also. He is so very pale. Yet his carriage is that of a man enjoying the best of health. He is tall and straight. He walks erectly and with a brisk athletic stride. But why did he choose number 212 at the extreme rear? That corridor, with dim electric bulbs, exudes a musty, unpleasant odor. I insisted vigorously on being given number 201, which is the front and blessed with southern exposure. The room clerk, a disagreeable fellow, was very reluctant to let me have it, as it is reserved for his more profitable transient trade. If only I'd been as self-assertive 30 years ago, I should now be a full-fledged professor instead of a broken-down assistant. I still smart from the cavalier manner in which the president of the university summarily recommended my vacation. Oh, well, the summer's rest will undoubtedly do me considerable good. It is pleasant to be away from the university. There is something positively gratifying about the absence of graduate students. If only it were not so lonely. I must devise a way of meeting the pale man in 212. Perhaps the room clerk can arrange matters. I have been here exactly a week, and if there is a friendly soul in this miserable little town, he has escaped my notice. So I cherish hopes that I might encounter the pale man in number 212, who has now moved to number 211. I noticed the change yesterday when I saw him coming out of his new room. But there is little advantage in moving only one room nearer to the front. We nodded again, and this time I thought I detected a certain injurious satisfaction in his somber black eyes. The pale man must be difficult to please, but he's again changed his room to 210. I am baffled by his conduct. If he is so desirous of locating himself more conveniently in a hotel, why does he not move to number 202, which is the nearest available room to the front, save mine? He has done it again. He is now occupying number 209. I am intrigued by his little game. What possible motive could he have? If he were not stone deaf, I would ask him. At present, I feel too exhausted to attempt such an enervating conversation. I am tremendously interested in the pale man's next move. He must either skip a room or remain where he is. For a permanent guest, the very old lady occupies 208. She has not budged from her room since I have been here, and I imagine she intends not to. Well, the mysterious guest was not forced to remain where he was, nor was he required to skip a room. The old lady in number 208 simplified matters by conveniently dying. attributed to old age. She was buried this morning. I was among the curious few who attended her funeral. When I returned home, I was in time to see the pale man leaving her room. Already, he has moved in. He favored me with a smile whose meaning was as if there were between us some secret that I failed to appreciate. My man of mystery now resides in number 207. I would have been astonished if he had not made his scheduled move. I have almost given up trying to understand his eccentric conduct. I still wonder whence he came. There is something indefinably foreign about his manner. I am curious to hear his voice. I like to imagine that he speaks the exotic tongue of some faraway country. If only I could somehow inveigle him into conversation. I am worried. This morning I awoke to find myself lying prone upon the floor. I must have fallen exhausted there after I returned to my room last night. I wonder if my condition is more serious than I had expected. For the first time, I recall the prolonged hand clasp of the university president when he bade me goodbye. He never expected to see me alive again. And the pale man has done an astounding thing. He has skipped 3 rooms and moved all the way to number 203. We are now very close neighbors. I have confined myself to my bed during these last few days. I even called the doctor, who looked me over and told me not to leave my room. For some reason, he does not want me to climb the stairs. The doctor had not been long gone when I was visited by the room clerk, who suggested, with a great show of kindly concern, that I use the facilities of the local hospital. With more firmness than I had been able to muster in a long time, I stated that I intend to remain where I am. The pale man is up to his old tricks. Last night, when I tottered down the hall, the door of number 202 was ajar. He sat in the rocking chair, idly smoking a cigarette, and looked up into my eyes with that peculiar, ambiguous smile that so deeply puzzles me. I now know. I know the identity of the pale man, and I know the meaning of his smile. Early this afternoon, I summoned the room clerk to my bedside. Please tell me, I asked, who is the man in number 202? The clerk stared. You must be mistaken. That was occupied. I myself saw the man there only 2 nights ago, I snapped. He's the tall, handsome fellow with the dark eyes and hair, unusually pale. He checked in the day that I arrived. The hotel man regarded me dubiously, as if I were trying to impose upon him. But I assure you, there was no such person in the house. As for his checking in the day you did, you were the only guest we registered that day. What? I've seen him 20 times. First, he had number 212 at the end of the corridor. Then he kept moving toward the front. Now he is next door in number 202. You're crazy, he exclaimed, and he saw that he meant what he said. I shut up at once and dismissed him. Thus it is that I can now understand the events of the past few weeks. I now comprehend the significance of the death of the lady in number 207. I suppose I should have guessed the pale man's identity when he skipped the 3 rooms to arrive nearly at my room the night I fell unconscious to the floor. He will be coming by and by to inhabit this room, his ultimate goal. When he comes, I shall at last be able to return his smile of grim recognition. Meanwhile, I have only to wait beyond my bolted door. And as I write, the door swings slowly open.
Hello. I will be reading from a book that magically appeared next to my mother's microwave called Scotland's Wicked Witches. This is what it looks like. And it is has short biographies of wicked witches. And of course, because they're Scottish, that means that they're more evil than just your regular garden variety witches. Because Scottish witches, well, they're Scottish witches. We remember Macbeth, we do. So, and the one I'm looking at is called Mary Lamont from 1662. Another case in 1662 involved teenager Mary Lamont, or Lawmont in the documents. Mary was accused of witchcraft, along with Margaret Duff and others from the parish of Innerkip in the west of Scotland. Part of her case involved an interesting collision between different belief systems, Christian, diabolic, and what might be called traditional. The latter, perhaps, hearkening back to pagan or at least pre-Christian origin. Much of Mary's apparent confession of 1662 consisted of elements found in other accusations. Although she was quite young when her reputed wickedness first asserted itself. And that might make a case memorable in itself. Mary was from the Greencock area, and she embarked on her career of renunciation of her Christian faith and being magical means and shapes-shifting into a cat, on being left on her when the demonic animal met her side. She also confessed to, along with a group of other witches, trying to throw the Kempach stone into the sea to sink ships in the Firth of Clyde. So Kempach stone, now widely known as Granny Kempach stone, although formerly as Longstone, stands in the Kempach Point at Gourock on the southern shore of the Firth of Clyde and is a 6-foot-high standing stone. It can be reached up a winding flight of narrow steps from Gourock's main shopping street. The stone bears a little resemblance to an old hunched woman wearing a hood, hence its name Granny. Good luck rituals were associated with the stone, and it was used by fishermen and newlywed couples. The ritual involved fetching a bucket of sand from the beach, then walking with the bucket while chanting and singing. Fishermen performed a ritual to ensure good weather and favorable wind and a large catch of fish, while betrothed couples or newlyweds hoped for a fruitful marriage with lots of healthy children. In truth, this ritual would have been frowned upon by the Church of 17th century Scotland, and in many of the parishes, this kind of practice, such as visiting shrines and wells, was deliberately discouraged and even prevented, being thought of at best being superstitious. It was not clear what the nature of the chanted verse was, but if this was interpreted as an incantation, this ritual could have been seen as witchcraft, and those taking part were prosecuted for malfeasance. That Mary and her companions, and by implication the devil, might be trying to get rid of the Granny Kempach stone is interesting in that it suggests the power of the stone was not in the domain of either Satan or Christ. Although the official records are missing or lost, Mary Lamont, Margaret Duff, and the others were accused and most likely found guilty of witchcraft and were executed. Some say an apparition of Mary, accompanied by the devil, can still be seen on some nights during the full moon, dancing around the Granny Kempach stone. All right. Our next reader is Kara.
I am going to be reading a short excerpt from something here in the Penguin Book of the Undead. This is a collection of stories about the undead, and it starts with some of the Greek stories, but then it goes into these writings from priests and monks who claim that they saw ghosts and otherworldly creatures. And this one is was written by William of Newburgh in between 1130 and 1200. And he included this in his History of English Affairs. So at the time, this is believed to be factual. And it is regarding, we might call it a zombie, but they call this creature a revenant. It would not be easy to believe reasonably that the bodies of the dead should rise from their graves, by what agency I do not know, and should wander around to cause terror or calamity for the living, only to return to the same tomb that opens of its own accord to receive them, except that numerous examples of our own time are at hand and testimonies of the fact are abundant. It would clearly be strange if such things happened long ago, since no such account can be found in the book of ancient authors, who applied their formidable energy, committing to writing everything worth remembering. For if they neglected by no means to write down even events of moderate significance, how could they have surpassed an event at the same time so amazing and so horrifying, if by chance it had occurred in their own age? In contrast, if I wanted to record every event of this kind that was revealed to have taken place in our time, the undertaking would be at once too difficult and too tiresome. A few years ago, a chaplain of a certain noble lady died and received burial at the noble monastery called Melrose. This man had very little respect for the sacred order to which he belonged, and acted very much as a layman. What especially blackened his reputation as a minister of the Holy Sacraments was his dedication to the vanity of hunting, with the result that he was known by many by the notorious nickname Hundeprest, that is, hound priest. And indeed, while he was alive, this preoccupation of his was alternately ridiculed by people or thought to be a refined pastime. But it was only after his death that the guilt deriving from it became clear, for he rose from his grave at night. He was unable to sow terror or cause harm in the monastery itself, due to the merits of the holy monks who lived there. After that, he wandered around outside the abbey and carried on with great groans and a hideous murmuring, particularly around the bedchamber of his former mistress. After this had happened a few times, she became very anxious and shared the enormity of her fear and sense of danger with one of the monks who visited her concerning an affair related to the abbey. She demanded with tears that prayers more earnest than usual be poured forth on her behalf, as though for one suffering in agony. The monk sympathized graciously and with good reason with her anxiety, for she seemed most deserving of numerous prayers from the holy community of that place. And he promised a prompt remedy through the mercy of the highest provider. The monk returned to the abbey and joined forces with another monk of the same age and temperament, and two strong young men, with whom he kept watch over the cemetery where that wretched priest lay buried. These 4 men, furnished with weapons and bravery, spent the night in that place, safe in the support that they provided for one another. Midnight had just passed, and no sign of the monster had appeared. Then it happened that the 3 of them, leaving alone in that place the one who had brought them all together, went into a nearby house, as they explained, to ward off the chill of the night with a fire. Then, when this monk had found himself all alone in that place, the devil, believing that he had found the right moment to break the monk's courage, roused his vessel, which had seemed to have lain quiet longer than usual. Seeing the monster from a distance, at first the monk grew stiff with fear, for he was alone, but soon he recovered his courage. When it was clear that there was no place to run, he valiantly intercepted the onslaught of the horror, which rushed toward him with a terrible roar, and buried the battle axe he was wielding deep into its body. When it received this wound, the monster let out a cry and, turning its back, fled away, though not quite as quickly as it had advanced. The monk harried his fleeing foe from behind and forced it back into its own tomb, which gaped open for the monster on its own accord. Once it had snatched its guest from the sight of its pursuer, the tomb appeared to close right away and with the same ease. When these events were taking place, the companions who had sought relief from the night's chill near the fire left the house and ran late to the scene. When they heard what had happened, at dawn they assisted in digging up that cursed corpse and dragging it away from the tomb. And so they carried the corpse beyond the walls of the abbey for burning and scattering of ashes. I have told this story in plain language exactly as I have heard it myself from devout men. I believe our next speaker is back to the Acting Ensemble.
Hello, I'm Melissa. I'm with the Acting Ensemble. And I wanted to let you know that one of the most famous ghost stories in America was written by a man named Washington Irving. His 1820 tale of a headless horseman who terrorizes the village of Sleepy Hollow is considered one of America's first ghost stories and one of its scariest. Irving may have drawn inspiration for his story when he was a teenager in Tarrytown, New York. He moved there in 1798 to flee a yellow fever outbreak in New York City. In this tale, Irving weaves together actual locations and family names, a little bit of Revolutionary War history, and pure imagination and fantasy. Here's a brief version of that story. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. Along the eastern shore of the Hudson, not far from the village of Tarrytown, there's a little valley among the high hills, one of the quietest places in the whole world. It goes by the name of Sleepy Hollow. A drowsy, dreamy influence seems to hang over Sleepy Hollow, infusing the very atmosphere. Some say the place exists under the sway of some witching power that holds a spell over the minds of the good, if peculiar, people. They are given to all kinds of marvelous belief, are subject to trances and visions. They frequently see strange sights and hear music and voices in the air. The whole neighborhood abounds with local tales, haunted spots, and twilight superstitions. The dominant spirit, however, that haunts this enchanted region and seems to be the commander-in-chief of all the powers of the air is the apparition of a figure on horseback without a head. It is said by some to be the ghost of a Hessian trooper, a German mercenary soldier who fought on the side of the British during the American War, whose head was carried away by a cannonball in some nameless battle, and who is always seen by the country folk hurrying along in the gloom of the night as if on the wings of the wind. His haunts are not confined to the valley, but extend at times to the adjacent roads, and especially to the vicinity of the church at no great distance. Indeed, many historians agree that due to the body of the trooper having been buried in the churchyard, the ghost rides in the nightly quest of his head, and that rushing speed with which he sometimes passes along the hollow like a midnight blast is because of his being belated and in a hurry to get back to the churchyard before daybreak. About 30 years after the American Revolutionary War, a man by the name of Ichabod Crane journeyed to Sleepy Hollow for the purpose of teaching children in the area. He was tall, exceedingly lank, with narrow shoulders, long arms and hands that dangled miles out of his sleeves, and long legs that ended in feet that might have served for shovels. To see him striding along the hillside on a windy day with his baggy clothes fluttering about him, one might have mistaken him for a scarecrow. He was, in fact, an odd mixture of someone who understood little and believed everything. His appetite for the marvelous was extraordinary. No tale was too gross or monstrous for him to swallow. As he would walk through the woods from the schoolhouse to the farmhouse where he lived, he would listen to the sounds of nature and believe he was hearing ghosts and witches. His only way to drive off these evil spirits was to sing psalm tunes, and the people of Sleepy Hollow would often hear his voice floating down from a distant hill in the middle of the night. Among Ichabod's students was Katrina Van Tassel, the only child of a well-off Dutch farmer. She was a girl of just 18, as rosy-cheeked as her father's peaches, and universally famed for both her beauty and her vast expectations. Ichabod Crane had a soft and foolish heart and took a fancy to Katrina, even more so after he visited her father's mansion with its rolling hills and green meadows and its thick blanket of orchards. His heart yearned for the damsel who was to inherit these lands, and he imagined how they might be turned into cash and invested. His plan of gaining Katrina's affection, however, was to meet with more than usual difficulties, including her horde of rustic admirers. Among these was the most formidable and burly Brom Bones, the hero of the country. He was broad-shouldered and double-jointed with short, curly black hair and a mixed sense of fun and arrogance. Such was the formidable rival with whom Ichabod Crane had to contend, and all things considered, a stouter man would have shrunk from the competition and a wiser man would have despaired. To take open field against such a rival would have been madness. So Ichabod made his advances to Katrina by visiting under the guise of her teacher, making it impossible for Brom to take the rivalry to open warfare as he would have preferred. As a result, Ichabod soon became the object of persecution to Brom Bones and his rough gang of riders. Once they smoked him out of his schoolhouse by stopping up the chimney. They also broke inside at night and turned everything so topsy-turvy that the poor schoolmaster began to think all the witches in the country held their meetings there. These matters went on for some time until one fine autumn day when the air was just beginning to chill. Sleepy Hollow was abuzz with the news of the annual merrymaking event at the Van Tassel Mansion, which was to take place that very evening. The gallant Ichabod spent at least half an hour extra preparing himself and arranging himself in the looking glass. The steed he rode was a broken-down plow horse. Gaunt and shaggy, the horse had a thin neck and a heavy head, but he must have had fire and metal in his day, if we may judge by his name, Gunpowder. Ichabod and Gunpowder arrived at the Van Tassel farm that evening and found the mansion adorned with flowers and filled with old farmers in homespun breeches and their families and neighbors. Brom Bones, however, was the hero of the scene, having arrived at the gathering on his favorite steed, Daredevil, a creature like himself, full of mettle and mischief. The food was unrivaled, and the music from the great hall summoned everyone to dance. Ichabod prided himself on dancing as much as upon his vocal powers. Not a limb or a fiber in his being was idle. To have seen his loosely hung frame in full motion, you would have thought he was possessed. People stood by, rolling their eyes and grinning. But how could he be anything but animated and joyous? The lady of his heart was his partner in dance, while Brom Bones, sorely smitten with love and jealousy, sat brooding by himself in one corner. Later in the evening, Ichabod was attracted to a knot of sager folks who sat gossiping about old times. That eventually evolved into telling of tales about ghosts and apparitions. Many dismal tales were told about funeral trains and mourning cries and wailings heard and seen by the great white tree. Some mention was also made of the woman in white who haunted the dark glen at Raven Rock and was often heard to shriek on winter nights before a storm, having perished there in the snow. The chief part of the stories, however, turned upon the favorite specter of Sleepy Hollow, the Headless Horseman, who'd been heard several times of late, patrolling the country in a midnight rush and tethering his horse nightly among the graves in the churchyard. Old Brower told the tale of how he met the Headless Horseman, how they galloped over bush and brake, over hill and swamp until they reached the bridge. The horseman suddenly turned into a skeleton, threw old Brower into the brook, and flew away over the treetops with a clap of thunder. Even more marvelous was the story from Brom Bones, who affirmed that on returning one night from a neighboring village, he'd been overtaken by this midnight trooper. He had offered to race him for a bowl of punch and should have won it too, but just as they came to the bridge, the Hessian bolted and vanished with a flash of fire. All these tales, told in that drowsy undertone of campfire stories, sank deep within Ichabod. The revelry gradually broke up, and Ichabod lingered behind to talk to Katrina. However, I fear that something must have gone terribly wrong in the conversation, for he went away shortly after, heavy-hearted and crestfallen. It was in the witching time of the night that Ichabod finally pursued his travel homewards. and he had never felt so lonely and dismal as he approached the very bridge where many ghost stories of the night had taken place. In the center of the road stood the great white tree, its limbs bent and gnarled. As Ichabod neared this fearful tree, he began to whistle. His heart began to thump, but he summoned his courage and gave his horse a kick in the ribs to dash across the bridge. Instead, Gunpowder went wild, darting backwards and to the side so suddenly that Ichabod was nearly sent sprawling into the mud. Looking up into the shadow of the grove, Ichabod saw something large, misshapen, black and towering like some gigantic monster ready to spring. Ichabod trembled, but summoned about a courage to ask, "Who are you?" He received no reply. Ichabod repeated in a more agitated voice, "Who are you?" Still, the shape said nothing. Then the shadowing object burst forward and with a scramble and a bound stood in the middle of the road. He appeared to be a horseman of large dimensions, mounted on a black and powerful horse. He offered no greeting, but kept to one side of the road, jogging alongside old Gunpowder and Ichabod. Ichabod quickened speed in hopes of leaving the stranger behind. The stranger, however, kept pace with him. When Ichabod pulled up and fell into a walk, the stranger did the same. Ichabod's heart began to sink as he urged Gunpowder to a trot and then to a run. And as they came to a rising ground, the moon that rose through the open sky shed moonlight on the shadowy traveler, his gigantic height and long cloak. And Ichabod was horrified to see that his head, which should have rested on his shoulders, was being carried under one arm. Away they dashed through thick and thin, stones flying and sparks flashing. They had just reached the road which turns off to Sleepy Hollow, but Gunpowder, as if possessed by a demon, made an opposite turn, plunging headlong down the hill to the left, straight past the famous whitewashed church. Ichabod's saddle began to slip. He barely had time to save himself from falling off by throwing his arms around Gunpowder's neck. An opening in the trees now cheered him with the hopes that the church bridge was at hand. If I can just reach that bridge, he thought, I am safe. He heard the black steed panting close behind him and smelled the brimstone of his breath. He gave Gunpowder a kick, and together they sprang and thundered across the bridge. Ichabod cast a look over his shoulder to see if his pursuer would vanish, according to the rule, in a flash of fire and brimstone. But instead, he saw the specter rising in his stirrups in the very act of hurling his head at him. Ichabod tried to dodge, but he was too late. Cranium encountered cranium with a tremendous crash. He tumbled headlong into the dust, and Gunpowder, the black steed, and the Headless Horseman passed like a whirlwind. The next morning, Gunpowder was found alone, without his saddle. Ichabod did not make an appearance at breakfast. Dinner hour came. No Ichabod. In one part of the road to the church, the saddle was found lying in the dirt. At the bridge, a diligent investigation found only Ichabod's hat and a smashed pumpkin. The schoolmaster himself was not to be discovered. The following Sunday, knots of gossipers collected in the churchyard to speculate further on the mysterious disappearance. The stories of the Headless Horsemen were called to mind, and when they considered them in the light of Ichabod's disappearance, they decided he must have been carried off by the galloping Hessian. Years later, some rumors had it that Ichabod Crane was still alive, that he left Sleepy Hollow partly out of his fear of ghosts and goblins, and partly due to his mortification from being dismissed by Katrina Van Tassel. Brom Bones, who shortly after his rival's disappearance conducted the beautiful Katrina to the Isle, seemed exceedingly knowing whenever the story of Ichabod was related, and burst into laughter at the mention of the pumpkin, leading some to believe that he knew more than he was saying. The old country wives, however, who are the best to judge these matters, maintain to this day that Ichabod was spirited away by supernatural means. If you pass by the bridge, you may hear Ichabod's voice at a distance, chanting a melancholy psalm tune among tranquil solitudes of Sleepy Hollow. The end.
Hello, back again. Okay, what I have is of 16th Scottish, and it was I heard this from a rock band called. However, this is any different singer. I'm just gonna read it through. So it involves a good Halloween tale. So here we go. I forbid you maidens, all that wear gold in your hair, to travel to Carter Hall, for young Tamlin is there. None that go by Carter Hall, but they leave him a pledge, either their mantles of green or else their maidenhead. Janet tied her kirtle green a bit above her knee, and she's gone to Carter Hall as fast as go can she. She'd not pulled a double rose, but only two, when up came young Tamlin, who said, "Lady, pull no more. And why came you to Carter Hall without command from me?" "I'll come and go," young Janet said, "and ask no leave of thee." Janet tied her kirtle green a bit above her knee, and she's gone to her father as fast as go can she. Well up spoke her father dear, he spoke meek and mild. "Oh, and alas, Janet," he said, "I think you go with child." "Well, if that be so," Janet said, "my soul shall bear the blame. There's not a knight in all your hall shall get the baby's name. For if my love was an earthly knight, as he is an elfin gray, I'd not change my own true love for any knight you have." So Janet tied her kirtle green a bit above her knee, and she's gone to Carter Hall as fast as go can she. "Oh, tell to me, Tamlin," she said, "why you came here to dwell. The Queen of Fairies caught me when from my horse I fell. And so at the end of 7 years, she pays a tithe to hell. I so fair and full of flesh, and fear it be myself. But tonight is Halloween, and the fairy folk ride. Those that would let true love win at Miles Cross, they must bide. So first let pass the horses black, then let pass the brown. Quickly run to the white steed, and pull the rider down. For I ride on the white steed, the nearest to the town. For I was an earthly knight, they give you that renown. Oh, they will turn me in your arms into a newt or a snake, but hold tight and fear not, I am your baby's father. And they will turn me in your arms into a lion bold, but hold me tight and fear not, and you love your child. And they will turn me in your arms into a naked knight, but cloak me in your mantle and keep me out of sight. In the middle of the night, she heard the bridle ring. She heeded what he did say, and together they did win. Then up spoke a fairy queen, an angry queen was she. Woe betide her ill-barred face, and ill death may she die. Oh, had I known Tamlin, she said, what this night I would see, I'd have looked him in the eyes and turned him to a tree. Are there any people out there who would like also to tell a tale or two?
I did find my book.
Oh, yes, please.
If you would like to hear a tale about a terrifying place called Mishawaka. Okay, this is a tale from South Bend Ghosts by Stephen Osborne, and it's called The House on Summerset. Brittany was very young when her family moved into the house on Summerset, but she'll never forget the 5 years they spent in that Mishawaka home. The house was on a double lot and may have been a barn at one time. The house on the front part of the lot was much larger, but the smaller 3-bedroom dwelling seemed ideal for Brittany and her family. There were 2 bedrooms upstairs, perfect for Brittany and her older sister, and one downstairs for Mom and Dad. They quickly settled in, and for a short while, everything seemed fine. Soon, however, the family realized that they were sharing their home with some very active spirits. Ooh. Brittany's mother, Elizabeth, first suspected that something odd was happening when the family went out for dinner one evening. Brittany had been playing with her collection of troll dolls, and being a typical little girl who apparently grew up in the 80s, she didn't want her sister messing around with her prized possessions. Brittany insisted that her sister leave the room first so that she could line up all the troll dolls so that they'd be waiting for her to play with when the family returned from their night out. When the family returned, however, they found that Brittany's dolls were placed in a circle with all of their heads facing inwards, the largest of the dolls placed in the center. Her daughters insisted that either mom or dad must have done it, while Elizabeth knew that neither she nor her husband were responsible. It was an odd moment, but not too troubling. Then Elizabeth began to hear a dog barking. The sound seemed to be coming from upstairs and was definitely inside the house. The family owned no dog, though. Following the sound, Elizabeth determined that the sound was coming from inside the closet in Brittany's room. There was also the rocking chair in Brittany's room that seemed to rock on its own. Elizabeth would enter the room to find the chair in motion, even on days when she knew no one had been in the room for hours. Then came the nightly footsteps. At the same time every night, Elizabeth could hear someone walking in the rooms above. "You could set your clock by it," she told me when I interviewed her. Upon investigation, Elizabeth could find no explanation for the noises. Everyone was accounted for, but still the footsteps could be heard every night at the exact same time. Sometimes Elizabeth could hear music playing. "It was very faint and hard to make out," she said, "but you could hear it. It seemed to be coming from the walls." Elizabeth's husband, Scott, was a practical man. He didn't believe in ghosts and felt that there had to be some logical explanation for the sounds. After all, there was no such thing as a haunted house, especially in Mishawaka. Creaky floorboards, banging pipes, there had to be a reasonable answer. He scoffed when Elizabeth would come to him with tales of her experiences, so she soon learned to keep quiet around Scott whenever something odd had occurred. One day, Brittany and her sister were playing when they decided to do some exploring. The closet in Brittany's bedroom was particularly large and had a wooden panel nailed in place at the back. Being curious girls, they pried the panel loose to find a small room beyond. The room seemed to be just a storage space, filled with toys, clothing, and stuffed animals, but the two girls were immediately filled with dread. Something about the room frightened them. They quickly put the wooden panel back into place. When Elizabeth learned of the girls' anxiety over this room, she wasn't surprised. It had been from this closet, after all, that Elizabeth had heard the dog barking. The odd sounds in the house continued. If anything, they seemed to increase. Cold spots could be felt at all times. Brittany and her sister could hear knocking on the floor above their heads while they were trying to sleep at night. Upstairs in the house were 3 small doors leading to attic-like storage spaces. The girls would wake up to find these open even though they'd been firmly closed when they'd gone to bed. And then the little girl began to make her presence known. Elizabeth's first encounter with the ghost was on a summer day. The girls had gone to the park to play, and Elizabeth used the quiet time to clean the kitchen. She was engrossed in her work and barely noticed when she heard the front door opening. Elizabeth heard the girls laughing as they tramped up the stairs. As she continued scrubbing, she glanced up to see a little girl through the lower pane of the kitchen window. It was a fleeting glance, so she assumed the blonde child was Brittany. Shortly after this, her other daughter and a friend bounded into the kitchen seeking refreshments. Elizabeth asked about Brittany. "She's still down at the park," her daughter replied. Elizabeth froze. She knew she'd seen a little girl in the window, and if it hadn't been Brittany. That was the first of many sightings of the spirit as Elizabeth began to feel a presence sitting next to her on the bed. Some nights she could actually feel someone climbing into bed next to her. Brittany remembers vividly the first time she saw the little girl. Her dad was in the bedroom sleeping while the girls and their mother sat in the living room watching television. She was laughing and enjoying the program when a creak on the stairs made her look away from the set. There, coming down the stairs, was a little girl. She had dirty blonde hair and wore an old-fashioned red dress. The girl stopped at the bottom of the stairs and paused to glance over at Brittany before quickly walking on into the bedroom where Dad was sleeping. Brittany remembers how shocked she and her sister were, but her mother merely shrugged and said, "I hope she leaves room for me in the bed." That moment will always stick in my mind, Brittany says today. After that night, Brittany began to receive nocturnal visits from the ghost herself. There were many nights when I would feel someone sitting on the side of the bed. I would open my eyes, thinking it was one of the 2 cats we had. Nothing would be there except a dent in the bed as if somebody was sitting there. Some nights she would awaken in the middle of the night to find the little girl standing at the foot of her bed. This went on for a few months, and Brittany refused to sleep in her room. She chose instead to sleep down in the living room. My older sister was much braver. She stayed up in her room for most of the years that we lived there. Her sister did have her share of experiences, though. She had a clock radio that would turn on even when unplugged and with no batteries in it, Brittany reports. The clock radio would often be found in the morning on the staircase. The cord would be wrapped around the clock, and it would inevitably be found on the 3rd step. Brittany's sister also had a doll that had been bought at a garage sale, which began to frighten the 2 girls. Not only would the doll be found in a different spot from where they'd left it, but on some occasions, the girls would see the head of the doll slowly turn on its own. Finally, they put the doll in the basement, which seemed to work. The doll ceased to trouble them after that. The small bathroom the girls used downstairs had full-length mirrors that they used to check their hair and general appearance at the beginning of their day. Often they would see dark figures in the mirror, seemingly right behind them. They'd turn, only to find nothing there. Brittany's sister often took one of her cats, Raja, into the bathroom with her while she bathed. One night, Brittany and her father were in the living room watching television and playing with the cat. Finally, Brittany's dad told her to let Raja out, as the cat kept going to the door. She did so and turned back just as her sister emerged from the bathroom with Raja bundled in her arms. The family owned 2 cats, but they were of very different colors, and Brittany knew that she hadn't been confused. It had been Raja that had been at the door crying to be let out. The 3rd step on the staircase also seemed to be constantly in need of repair. No matter how many times Brittany's father fixed it, several days later the wood would crack and break. One day, Elizabeth and her daughters went to visit her mother, who lived just a block away. During the visit, Brittany became bored and decided to walk back to their house. Getting there, she found that her father hadn't returned home from work yet and the house was still locked tight, so she waited for him on the front step. Looking around, she saw a shadow being cast on the grass by something moving around in the kitchen. She looked into the kitchen window but could see no one there. Thinking that her father was home after all, she knocked on the door and called out to him. She could hear no one moving inside, so she checked the driveway. Her father's truck wasn't there. The house was empty. Brittany wisely decided to go back to her grandmother. She informed her mother once again the spirits were walking around their home. By the time she, her sister, and her mother returned to the house, Scott had arrived home. He'd found the house locked up tight and had seen no sign that anyone had been moving around in the kitchen or anywhere else. Not believing in ghosts, he put the experience down to his daughter's overactive imagination. The amount of paranormal activity in the house was beginning to take its toll on Elizabeth. She would often feel as if someone was watching her. And once, while doing the dishes, the feeling was so intense that she whirled about and shouted at the empty room, "This is my house! Leave me alone!" The sensation of being watched faded, for the time being. Very often, while pulling away from the house in her car, Elizabeth would see a face looking down at her from one of the upstairs windows. This happened so often that Elizabeth got into the habit of making sure she kept her eyes away from the house while leaving. Seeing the face in the window was unsettling, to say the least. Elizabeth needed answers, so she contacted a psychic. It took some convincing to get her husband to agree, but he finally relented. On the night the psychic came, Elizabeth had her daughter stay with her mother. The psychic toured the house and told Elizabeth that she simply had too many spirits in her house. He provided Elizabeth with little information, so she arranged for another psychic investigator to visit. This time, the woman who came told Elizabeth that there definitely was the ghost of a little girl haunting the house. She suggested that the family place some toys in an area where the ghost had often been seen and put talcum powder on the floor to see if they could get any footprints. They tried this, but had no results. The events taking place in the Mishawaka home were having another effect as well. Elizabeth and her husband found themselves drifting apart. Today, Elizabeth isn't sure if the turmoil in the family brought about an increase in paranormal activity or if the ghostly happenings were causing the strain in their marriage. In either case, Elizabeth eventually asked for a divorce. Soon she and her daughters packed up and moved into her mother's house, leaving Scott in the house on Summerset. This kept the girls close by so they could visit their father often. An uncle, Tom, also living at the time with Elizabeth's mother, had been given a key to the house on Summerset by Scott just in case he ever got tired of the kids and needed some time away. The uncle had heard of the supernatural happenings experienced by the girls, but didn't believe in ghosts. One night, he decided to take Scott up on the offer. Tom let himself in, since Scott was away, and reclined on the couch, intending to enjoy a peaceful evening watching television. Before long, however, he began to hear footsteps upstairs. Puzzled, Tom checked upstairs, thinking that he'd been mistaken, that he was alone in the house. There was nobody up there. He had barely settled back onto the couch when a hall door slammed shut. Now thoroughly unnerved, he quickly left the house, later telling Scott that he appreciated the offer, but he wouldn't be staying there again. Scott eventually had his own experience. He was watching television one night when he looked up to see a young blonde girl staring at him through the front porch window. Scott's face drained of color as she vanished right in front of him. The next time he saw Elizabeth, he simply said, "I believe you now." Later, Scott rearranged the furniture so that he could watch television out of sight of the front porch window, just in case the little girl decided to make another appearance. Elizabeth finally asked the woman who lived in the house on the front part of the lot if anything unusual had happened. The woman reported that she, too, had many similar experiences. Once she'd been pulled down the stairs by her ankles by some invisible force. She said that after that, she'd called the elders of her church in to bless her home. She didn't reveal if this had stopped the experiences or not. Talking with other neighbors, Elizabeth learned that many years ago, a murder had occurred on the property. According to their stories, a man who'd lived in the front house killed his entire family. One daughter, a little girl with dirty blonde hair, ran in terror to the back house to hide. The father caught up with her and killed her on the staircase, on the third step, the one that refused to stay repaired. The end.
Thank you, Mel. That was great.
Absolutely great.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
I can't start the video though. Oh, so I'm gonna have to use that. Okay. Okay. Right. I think we have scared everybody out of their wits, have we not? We're going to go ahead and bring this to a close. Then.
Where's Summerset? I just want to know.
We want to know where Summerset is, Mel.
Sure. So Summerset is close to Blair Hills in Mishawaka. It's
Of course, it's in Blair Hill.
of course it is. Where I know because I'm a Blair Hills witch, and it's off of Milburn, and I believe that area was once called Hooligan Heights, but I think that was before my time. But it's actually right next to Mary Gibbard Park. There's a park there. They just put in a bike park for BMXing and such. And I think I've seen the house. I think the house is still there. And I've driven by it while going to that park, and it does give you some very creepy vibes, or gave me some very creepy vibes. So drive down there one day and see if you can find it.
Interesting. I once had a reference question where somebody was going to have a house built, like kind of near Blair Hills. It's kind of like over actually closer to Marion High School. And they said, are there any cemeteries nearby? I think they were like thinking of Poltergeist or something, right?
Yep.
So, I was able to tell them that the closest burial ground would have been at the convent across the street from Marion. And I guess, if they built the house, maybe they felt like the walking distance for any ghost was too far. So it was probably okay. I'm going to assume.
Yeah.
All right. Do we have a close for this? Oh, I have this one. There used to be a radio show, CBS Mystery Theater, and they would always end it this way: pleasant dreams.
Dreams. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.